For the first 2 weeks, Syed Hussein further related, no one was permitted to visit the Bab. My brother and I alone were admitted into his presence. Syed Hassan would every day, accompanied by one of the guards, descend to the town and purchase our daily necessities. Sheikh Hassan Izanuzi, who had arrived at Marku, spent the nights in a masjid outside the gate of the town. He acted as an intermediary between those of the followers of the Bab who occasionally visited Marku and Syed Hassan, my brother, who would in turn submit the petitions of the believers to their master and would acquaint Sheikh Hassan with his reply. One day the Bab charged my brother to inform Sheikh Hassan that he would himself request Ali Khan to alter his attitude towards the believers who visited Marku and to abandon his severity. Tell him, he added, I will tomorrow instruct the warden to conduct him to this place. I was greatly surprised at such a message. How could the domineering and self-willed Ali Khan, I thought to myself, be induced to relax the severity of his discipline? Early the next day, the gate of the castle being still closed, we were surprised by a sudden knock at the door, knowing full well that orders had been given that no one was to be admitted before the hour of sunrise. We recognized the voice of Ali Khan, who seemed to be expostulating with the guards, one of whom presently came in and informed me that the warden of the castle insisted on being allowed admittance into the presence of the Bab. I conveyed his message and was commanded to usher him at once into his presence. As I was stepping out of the door of his antechamber, I found Ali Khan standing at the threshold in an attitude of complete submission, his face betraying an expression of unusual humility and wonder. His self-assertiveness and pride seemed to have entirely vanished. Humbly and with extreme courtesy, he returned my salute and begged me to allow him to enter the presence of the Bab. I conducted him to the room which my master occupied. His limbs trembled as he followed me. An inner agitation, which he could not conceal, brooded over his face. The Bab arose from his seat and welcomed him. Bowing reverently, Ali Khan approached and flung himself at his feet. "Deliver me," he pleaded, "from my perplexity. I adjure you by the Prophet of God, your illustrious ancestor, to dissipate my doubts, for their weight has well nigh crushed my heart. I was riding through the wilderness and was approaching the gate of the town, when, it being the hour of dawn, my eyes suddenly beheld you, standing by the side of the river, engaged in offering your prayer. With outstretched arms and upraised eyes, you were invoking the name of God. I stood still and watched you. I was waiting for you to terminate your devotions, that I might approach and rebuke you for having ventured to leave the castle without my leave. In your communion with God, you seemed so wrapped in worship that you were utterly forgetful of yourself. I quietly approached you. In your state of rapture, you remained wholly unaware of my presence. I was suddenly seized with great fear and recoiled at the thought of awakening you from your ecstasy. I decided to leave you, to proceed to the guards and to reprove them for their negligent conduct. I soon found out, to my amazement, that both the outer and inner gates were closed. They were opened at my request. I was ushered into your presence, and now find you, to my wonder, seated before me. I am utterly confounded. I know not whether my reason has deserted me." The Bab answered and said, "What you have witnessed is true and undeniable. You belittle this revelation, and have contemptuously disdained its author. God the All-Merciful, desiring not to afflict you with his punishment, has willed to reveal to your eyes the truth. By his divine interposition, he has instilled into your heart the love of his chosen one, and caused you to recognize the unconquerable power of his faith." This marvelous experience completely changed the heart of Ali Khan. Those words had calmed his agitation and subdued the fierceness of his animosity. By every means in his power, he determined to atone for his past behavior. "A poor man, Sheikh," he hastily informed the Bab, "is yearning to attain your presence. He lives in a masjid outside the gate of Marku. I pray you that I myself be allowed to bring him to this place, that he may meet you. By this act I hope that my evil deeds may be forgotten, so that I may be enabled to wash away the stains of my cruel behavior towards your friends." His request was granted, whereupon he went straightway to Sheikh Hassan-i-Zunusi and conducted him into the presence of his master. Ali Khan set out, within the limits imposed upon him, to provide whatever would tend to alleviate the rigor of the captivity of the Bab. At night, the gate of the castle was still closed. In the daytime, however, those whom the Bab desired to see were allowed to enter his presence, were able to converse with him, and to receive his instructions. As he lay confined within the walls of the castle, he devoted his time to the composition of the Persian Bayan, the most weighty, the most illuminating and comprehensive of all his works. In it he laid down the laws and precepts of his dispensation, plainly and emphatically announced the advent of a subsequent revelation, and persistently urged his followers to seek and find him whom God would make manifest, warning them lest they allow the mysteries and illusions in the Bayan to interfere with their recognition of his cause. I have heard Sheikh Hassan-i-Zunusi bear witness to the following. The voice of the Bab, as he dictated the teachings and principles of his faith, could be clearly heard by those who are dwelling at the foot of the mountains. The melody of his chanting, the rhythmic flow of the verses which streamed from his lips, caught our ears and penetrated into our very souls. Mountain and valley re-echoed the majesty of his voice. Our hearts vibrated in their depths to the appeal of his utterance. There is a footnote. This is the prayer which the Bab himself quotes in the Bahá'í-Bábí as his supplication during the month of his captivity in the castle of Marku. O my God, grant to him, to his descendants, to his family, to his friends, to his subjects, to his relatives, and all the inhabitants of the earth, the light which will clarify their vision and facilitate their task. Grant that they may partake of the noblest works here and hereafter. In truth, nothing is impossible to thee. O my God, give him the power to bring about a revival of thy religion, and give life by him to what thou hast changed in thy book. Manifest through him thy new commandments, so that through him thy religion may blossom again. Put into his hands a new book, pure and holy, that this book may be free from all doubt and uncertainty, and that no one may be able to alter or destroy it. O my God, dispel through thy splendor all darkness, and through his evident power do away with the antiquated laws. By his preeminence ruin those who have not followed the ways of God. Through him destroy all tyrants, put an end through his sword to all discord, annihilate through his justice all forms of oppression, render the rulers obedient to his commandments, subordinate all the empires of the world to his empire. O my God, humble everyone who desires to humble him, destroy all his enemies, deny anyone who denies him, and confuse anyone who spurns the truth, resists his orders, endeavors to darken his light and blot his name. The Bab then adds these words: repeat these benedictions often, and, if time to recite them all be lacking, do not fail to say at least the last. Be awake on the day of the apparition of him whom God will make manifest, because this prayer has come down from heaven for him, although I hope no sorrow awaits him. I have taught the believers in my religion never to rejoice over the misfortune of anyone. It is possible, therefore, that at the time of the appearance of the Son of Truth no suffering may fall upon him. The Book of the Seven Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, pages 64 to 65. The gradual relaxation of the stern discipline imposed upon the Bab encouraged an increasing number of his disciples from the different provinces of Persia to visit him in the castle of Marku. An unceasing stream of eager and devout pilgrims was directed to its gate through the gentleness and leniency of Ali Khan. After a stay of 3 days, they would invariably be dismissed by the Bab, with instructions to return to their respective fields of service and to resume their labors for the consolidation of his faith. Ali Khan himself never failed to pay his respects to the Bab each Friday and to assure him of his unswerving loyalty and devotion. He often presented him with the rarest and choicest fruit available in the neighborhood of Maku, and would continually offer him such delicacies as he thought would prove agreeable to his taste and liking. In this manner the Bab spent the summer and autumn within the walls of that castle. A winter followed by such exceptional severity that even the copper implements were affected by the intensity of the cold. The beginning of that season coincided with the month of Muharram of the year AH 1264, the 9th of December AD 1847 to the 8th of January 1848. The water which the Bab used for his ablutions was of such icy coldness that its drops glistened as they froze upon his face. He would invariably, after the termination of each prayer, summon Syed Hussein to his presence, and would request him to read aloud to him a passage from the Murikul Kulub, a work composed by the late Haji Mullah Mihdi, the great-grandfather of Haji Mirza Kamaluddin Inaraki, in which the author extols the virtues, laments the death, and narrates the circumstances of the martyrdom of the Imam Hussein. The recital of those sufferings would provoke intense emotion in the heart of the Bab. His tears would keep flowing as he listened to the tale of the unutterable indignities heaped upon him, and of the agonizing pain which he was made to suffer at the hands of a perfidious enemy. As the circumstances of that tragic life were unfolded before him, the Bab was continually reminded of that still greater tragedy which was destined to signalize the advent of the promised Hussein. To him, those past atrocities were but a symbol which foreshadowed the bitter afflictions which his own beloved Hussein was soon to suffer at the hands of his countrymen. He wept as he pictured in his mind those calamities which he, who was to be made manifest, was predestined to suffer, calamities such as the Imam Hussein, even in the midst of his agonies, was never made to endure. A footnote here says, during his sojourn at Maku, the Bab composed a great number of works, amongst the more important of which may be especially mentioned the Persian Bayan and the Seven Proofs, Dala'il-i-Sabi, both of which contain ample internal evidence of having been written at this period. Indeed, if we may credit a statement made in the Tariq-i-Jadid on the authority of Mirza Abdul Wahhab, the various writings of the Bab current in Tabriz alone amounted in all to not less than 1,000,000 verses. From A Traveller's Narrative, Note L, page 274. In one of his writings, revealed in the year AH 1260, the Bab declares the following: "The spirit of prayer which animates my soul is the direct consequence of a dream which I had in the year before the declaration of my mission. In my vision I saw the head of the Imam Hussein, the Sayyidu Shuhada, which was hanging upon a tree. Drops of blood dripped profusely from his lacerated throat. With feelings of unsurpassed delight, I approached that tree, and stretching forth my hands, gathered a few drops of that sacred blood, and drank them devoutly. When I awoke, I felt that the Spirit of God had permeated and taken possession of my soul. My heart was thrilled with the joy of his divine presence, and the mysteries of his revelation were unfolded before my eyes in all their glory." No sooner had Muhammad Shah condemned the Bab to captivity amid the mountain fastnesses of Azerbaijan than he became afflicted with a sudden reverse of fortune, such as he had never known before, and which struck at the very foundations of his state. Appalling disaster surprised his forces that were engaging in maintaining internal order throughout the provinces. The standard of rebellion was hoisted in Khorasan, and so great was the consternation provoked by that rising that the projected campaign of the Shah to Herat was immediately abandoned. Haji Mirza Akaz's recklessness and prodigality had fanned into flame the smouldering fires of discontent, had exasperated the masses, and encouraged them to stir up sedition and mischief. The most turbulent elements in Khorasan that inhabited the regions of Kushan, Burjnurd, and Shiravan leagued themselves with the Salah, son of the Asifud-Dawleh, the elder maternal uncle of the Shah and governor of the province, and repudiated the authority of the central government. Whatever forces were dispatched from the capital met with immediate defeat at the hands of the chief instigators of the rebellion, Jafar Quli Khan Inamdar and Amir Arslan Khan, son of the Salah, who conducted the operations against the forces of the Shah, displayed the utmost cruelty and, having repulsed the attacks of the enemy, mercilessly put their captives to death. Mullah Hussein was at the time residing at Mashhad, and was endeavouring, despite the tumult which that revolt had occasioned, to spread the knowledge of the new revelation. No sooner had he discovered that the Salah, in his desire to extend the scope of the rebellion, had determined to approach him and obtain his support, than he promptly decided to leave the city in order to avoid implicating himself in the plots of that proud and rebellious chief. In the dead of night, with only Kambar Ali as his attendant, he proceeded on foot in the direction of Tehran, from which place he was determined to visit Azerbaijan, where he hoped to meet the Bab. His friends, when they learned of the manner of his departure, immediately provided whatever would be conducive to the comforts of his long and arduous journey, and hastened to overtake him. Mullah Hussein declined their help. "I have vowed," he said, "to walk the whole distance that separates me from my beloved. I shall not relax in my resolve until I shall have reached my destination." He even tried to induce Kambar Ali to return to Mashhad, but was finally obliged to yield to his entreaty to allow him to act as his servant throughout his pilgrimage to Azerbaijan. On his way to Tehran, Mullah Hussein was enthusiastically greeted by the believers in the different towns through which he passed. They addressed to him the same request and received from him the same reply. I have heard the following testimony from the lips of Akei Kalim. When Mullah Hussein arrived at Tehran, I, together with a large number of believers, went to visit him. He seemed to us the very embodiment of constancy, of piety and virtue. He inspired us with his rectitude of conduct and passionate loyalty. Such were the force of his character and the ardour of his faith, that we felt convinced that he, unaided and alone, would be capable of achieving the triumph of the faith of God. He was, with secrecy, ushered into the presence of Baha'u'llah, and soon after his interview proceeded to Azerbaijan. The night before his arrival at Marku, which was the eve of the 4th Nowruz after the declaration of the mission of the Bab, and which fell in that year, the year A.H. 1264, A.D. 1848, on the 13th of the month of Rabi'uth Thani, Ali Khan dreamed a dream. In my sleep, he thus relates his story, I was startled by the sudden intelligence that Muhammad, the prophet of God, was soon to arrive at Marku, that he was to proceed directly to the castle in order to visit the Bab, and to offer him his congratulations on the advent of the Nowruz festival. In my dream I ran out to meet him, eager to extend to so holy a visitor the expression of my humble welcome. In a state of indescribable gladness, I hastened on foot in the direction of the river, and as I reached the bridge, which lay at a distance of a maidan from the town of Marku, I saw 2 men advancing towards me. I thought one of them to be the prophet himself, while the other, who walked behind him, I supposed to be one of his distinguished companions. I hastened to throw myself at his feet, and was bending to kiss the hem of his robe, when I suddenly awoke. A great joy had flooded my soul. I felt as if paradise itself, with all its delights, had been crowded into my heart. Convinced of the reality of my vision, I performed my ablutions, offered my prayer, arrayed myself in my richest attire, anointed myself with perfume, and proceeded to the spot where, the night before in my dream, I had gazed upon the countenance of the prophet. I had instructed my attendants to saddle 3 of my best and swiftest steeds, and conduct them immediately to the bridge. The sun had just risen when, alone and unescorted, I walked out of the town of Marku in the direction of the river. As I approached the bridge, I discovered, with a throb of wonder, the 2 men whom I had seen in my dream walking one behind the other and advancing towards me. In Instinctively I fell at the feet of the one whom I believed to be the prophet and devoutly kissed them. I begged him and his companion to mount the horses which I had prepared for their entry into Marcoux. "Nay," was his reply, "I have vowed to accomplish the whole of my journey on foot. I will walk to the summit of this mountain and will there visit your prisoner." This strange experience of Ali Khan brought about a deepening of reverence in his attitude towards the Bab. His faith in the potency of his revelation became even greater, and his devotion to him was vastly increased. In an attitude of humble surrender, he followed Mullah Hussein until they reached the gate of the castle. As soon as the eyes of Mullah Hussein fell upon the countenance of his master, who was seen standing at the threshold of the gate, he halted instantly, and bowing low before him, stood motionless by his side. The Bab stretched forth his arms and affectionately embraced him. Taking him by the hand, he conducted him to his chamber. He then summoned his friends into his presence and celebrated in their company the feast of Nowruz. Dishes of sweetmeats and of the choicest fruits had been spread before him. He distributed them among his assembled friends, and as he offered some of the quinces and apples to Mullah Hussein, he said, "These luscious fruits have come to us from Milan, the Ard-i Janat, and have been specially plucked and consecrated to this feast by Ismullahul Fatik, Muhammad Taqi." A footnote says of Ard-i Janat, literally the land of paradise. Until that time, no one of the disciples of the Bab but Sayyid Hussein Yazdi and his brother had been allowed to spend the night within the castle. That day Ali Khan went to the Bab and said, "If it be your desire to retain Mullah Hussein with you this night, I am ready to abide by your wish, for I have no will of my own. However long you desire him to stay with you, I pledge myself to carry out your command." The disciples of the Bab continued to arrive in increasing numbers at Marcoux, and were immediately and without the least restriction admitted to his presence. One day, as the Bab, in the company of Mullah Hussein, was looking out over the landscape of the surrounding country from the roof of the castle, he gazed towards the west, and, as he saw the Araxes winding its course far away below him, turned to Mullah Hussein and said, "That is the river, and this is the bank thereof, of which the poet Hafiz has thus written, 'O Zephyr, shouldst thou pass by the banks of the Araxes, implant a kiss on the earth of that valley, and make fragrant thy breath. Hail, 1,000 times hail to thee, O abode of Salma! How dear is the voice of thy camel-drivers, how sweet the jingling of thy bells! The days of your stay in this country are approaching their end, but for the shortness of your stay we would have shown you the abode of Salma, even as we have revealed to your eyes the banks of the Araxes." By the abode of Salma, the Bab meant the town of Salmaz, which is situated in the neighborhood of Chirik, and which the Turks designate as Salmaz. Continuing his remarks, the Bab said, "It is the immediate influence of the Holy Spirit that causes words such as these to stream from the tongues of poets, the significance of which they themselves are oftentimes unable to apprehend." The following verse is also divinely inspired. "Shiraz will be thrown into a tumult. A youth of sugar tongue will appear. I fear lest the breath of his mouth should agitate and upset Baghdad." The mystery enshrined within this verse is now concealed. It will be revealed in the year after Hin. The Bab subsequently quoted this well-known tradition. Treasures lie hidden beneath the throne of God. The key to those treasures is the tongue of poets. He then, one after the other, related to Mullah Hussein those events which must need transpire in the future, and bade him not to mention them to anyone. A footnote here says, in the Dala'il-i-Sabi, the Bab reveals the following. The Hadith Azerbaijan, referring to this matter, says, "The things which will appear in Azerbaijan are necessary for us. Nothing can prevent their occurrence. Remain therefore in your homes, but if you hear that an agitator has appeared, then hasten towards him." And the Hadith continues, saying, "Woe to the Arabs, for the civil war is near." If in speaking these last words the Prophet had intended to refer to his own mission, his statement would have been vain and worthless. from the Books of Seven Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, page 47. A few days after your departure from this place, the Bab informed him, they will transfer us to another mountain. Ere you arrive at your destination, the news of our departure from Marku will have reached you. The prediction which the Bab had uttered was promptly fulfilled. Those who had been charged to watch secretly the movements and conduct of Ali Khan submitted to Haji Mirza Akazi a detailed report in which they expatiated upon his extreme devotion to his prisoner and described such incidents as tended to confirm their statements. Day and night, they wrote him, the warden of the castle of Marku is to be seen associating with his captives in conditions of unrestrained freedom and friendliness. Ali Khan, who obstinately refused to wed his daughter with the heir to the throne of Persia, pleading that such an act would so infuriate the Sunni relatives of his mother that they would unhesitatingly put him and his daughter to death, now, with the keenest eagerness, desires that same daughter to be espoused of the Bab. The latter has refused, but Ali Khan still persists in his entreaty. But for the prisoner's refusal, the nuptials of the maiden would have been already celebrated. Ali Khan had actually made such a request, and had even begged Mullah Hussein to intercede in his behalf with the Bab, but had failed to obtain his consent. These malevolent reports had an immediate influence upon Haji Mirza Akazi. Fear and resentment again impelled that capricious minister to issue a peremptory order for the transference of the Bab to the castle of Shirik. 20 days after Nowruz, the Bab bade farewell to the people of Marku, who, in the course of his 9 months' captivity, had recognized to a remarkable degree the power of his personality and the greatness of his character. Mullah Hussein, who had already, at the bidding of the Bab, departed from Marku, was still in Tabriz, when the news of his master's predicted transference to Shirik reached him. As the Bab bade his last farewell to Mullah Hussein, he addressed him in these words: "You have walked on foot all the way from your native province to this place. On foot you must likewise return until you reach your destination, for your days of horsemanship are yet to come. You are destined to exhibit such courage, such skill and heroism as shall eclipse the mightiest deeds of the heroes of old. Your daring exploits will win the praise and admiration of the dwellers in the eternal kingdom. You should visit on your way the believers of Kui, of Urumiyyi, of Maragi, of Milan, of Tabriz, of Zanjan and Qazvin, and of Tehran. To each you will convey the expression of my love and tender affection. You will strive to inflame their hearts anew with the fire of the love of the beauty of God. You will endeavor to fortify their faith in his revelation. From Tehran you should proceed to Mazindaran, where God's hidden treasure will be made manifest to you. You will be called upon to perform deeds so great as will dwarf the mightiest achievements of the past. The nature of your task will in that place be revealed to you, and strength and guidance will be bestowed upon you that you may be fitted to render your service to his cause." On the morning of the 9th day after Nowruz, Mullah Hussein set forth, as bidden by his master, on his journey to Mazindaran. To Kambar Ali the Bab addressed these parting words: "The Kambar Ali of a bygone age would glory in that his namesake has lived to witness a day for which even he," that is a reference to Muhammad, "who was the lord of his lord, sighed in vain, of which he, with keen longing, has spoken, would that my eyes could behold the faces of my brethren who have been privileged to attain unto his day." Chapter 14. Mullah Hussein's journey to Mazindaran. Ali Khan cordially invited Mullah Hussein to tarry a few days in his home before his departure from Marku. He expressed a keen desire to provide every facility for his journey to Mazindaran. The latter, however, refused to delay his departure or to avail himself of the means of comfort which Ali Khan had so devotedly placed at his disposal. He, faithful to the instructions he had received, stopped at every town and village that the Bab had directed him to visit, gathered the faithful, conveyed to them the love, the greetings, and the assurances of their beloved master, quickened afresh their zeal, and exhorted them to remain steadfast in his way. In Tehran, he was again privileged to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah, and to receive from his hands that spiritual sustenance which enabled him with such undaunted courage to brave the perils that so fiercely assailed the closing days of his life. From Tehran, Mullah Hussein proceeded to Mazindaran in eager expectation of witnessing the revelation of the hidden treasure promised to him by his master. Qudus was at that time living in Bafurush, in the home which had originally belonged to his own father. He freely associated with all classes of people, and by the gentleness of his character and the wide range of his learning had won the affection and unqualified admiration of the inhabitants of that town. Upon his arrival in that city, Mullah Hussein went directly to the home of Qudus and was affectionately received by him. Qudus himself waited upon his guest and did his utmost to provide whatever seemed necessary for his comfort. With his own hands he removed the dust and washed the blistered skin of his feet. He offered him the seat of honor in the company of his assembled friends, and introduced with extreme reverence each of the believers who had gathered to meet him. On the night of his arrival, as soon as the believers who had been invited to dinner to meet Mullah Hussein had returned to their homes, the host, turning to his guest, inquired whether he would enlighten him more particularly regarding his intimate experiences with the Bab in the castle of Markul. "Many and diverse," replied Mullah Hussein, "were the things which I heard and witnessed in the course of my 9 days' association with him. He spoke to me of things relating both directly and indirectly to his faith. He gave me, however, no definite directions as to the course I should pursue for the propagation of his cause. All he told me was this: on your way to Tehran, you should visit the believers in every town and village through which you pass. From Tehran, you should proceed to Mazindaran, for there lies a hidden treasure, which will be revealed to you, a treasure which will unveil to your eyes the character of the task you are destined to perform." By his allusions, I could, however, dimly perceive the glory of his revelation, and was able to discern the signs of the future ascendancy of his cause. From his words I gathered that I should eventually be called upon to sacrifice my unworthy self in his path, for on previous occasions, whenever dismissing me from his presence, the Bab would invariably assure me that I should again be summoned to meet him. This time, however, as he spoke to me his parting words, he gave me no such promise, nor did he allude to the possibility of my ever meeting him again face to face in this world. "The feast of sacrifice," were his last words to me, "is fast approaching. Arise and gird up the loin of endeavor, and let nothing detain you from achieving your destiny. Having attained your destination, prepare yourself to receive us, for we too shall ere long follow you." Qudus inquired whether he had brought with him any of his master's writings, and on being informed that he had none with him, presented his guest with the pages of a manuscript which he had in his possession, and requested him to read certain of its passages. As soon as he had read a page of that manuscript, his countenance underwent a sudden and complete change. His features betrayed an undefinable expression of admiration and surprise. The loftiness, the profundity, above all, the penetrating influence of the words he had read, provoked intense agitation in his heart, and called forth the utmost praise from his lips. Laying down the manuscript, he said, "I can well realize that the author of these words has drawn his inspiration from that fountainhead which stands immeasurably superior to the sources whence the learning of men is ordinarily derived. I hereby testify to my whole-hearted recognition of the sublimity of these words, and to my unquestioned acceptance of the truth which they reveal." From the silence which Qudus observed, as well as from the expression which his countenance betokened, Mullah Hussein concluded that no one else except his host could have penned those words. He instantly arose from his seat, and standing with bowed head at the threshold of the door, reverently declared, "The hidden treasure of which the Bab has spoken now lies unveiled before my eyes. Its light has dispelled the gloom of perplexity and doubt. Though my master be now hidden amid the mountain fastnesses of Azerbaijan, the sign of his splendor and the revelation of his might stand manifest before me. I have found in Mazindaran the reflection of his glory." How grave, how appalling the mistake of Haji Mirza Akasi! This foolish minister had vainly imagined that by condemning the Bab to a life of hopeless exile in a remote and sequestered corner of Azerbaijan, he would succeed in concealing from the eyes of his countrymen that flame of God's undying fire. Little did he perceive that by setting up the light of God upon a hill, he was helping to diffuse its radiance and to proclaim its glory. By his own acts, by his amazing miscalculations, instead of hiding that heavenly flame from the eyes of men, he gave it still further prominence and helped to excite its glow. How fair, on the other hand, was Mullah Hussein, and how keen and sure his judgment. Of those who had known and seen him, none could for one moment question the erudition of this youth, his charm, his high integrity, and amazing courage. Had he, after the death of Sayyid Qasim, declared himself the promised Qaim, the most distinguished among his fellow disciples would have unanimously acknowledged his claim and submitted to his authority. Had not Mullah Muhammad-i Mamaqani, that noted and learned disciple of Sheikh Ahmad-i Asai, after he was made acquainted in Tabriz by Mullah Hussein with the claims of the new revelation, declared, "I take God as my witness, had this claim which the Sayyid-i Bab has made been advanced by this same Mullah Hussein, I would, in view of his remarkable traits of character and breadth of knowledge, have been the first to champion his cause, and to proclaim it to all people. As he, however, has chosen to subordinate himself to another person, I have ceased to have any confidence in his words, and have refused to respond to his appeal." Had not Sayyid Muhammad Baqir-i Rashti, when he heard Mullah Hussein so ably resolve the perplexities which had long afflicted his mind, testified in such glowing terms to his high attainments, I, who fondly imagined myself capable of confounding and silencing Sayyid Qasim-i Rashti, realized, when I first met and conversed with him, who claims to be only his humble disciple, how grievously I erred in my judgment. Such is the strength with which this youth seems endowed, that if he were to declare the day to be night, I would still believe him able to deduce such proofs as would conclusively demonstrate, in the eyes of the learned divines, the truth of his statement. On the very night he was brought in contact with the Bab, Mullah Hussein, though at first conscious of his own infinite superiority and predisposed to belittle the claims advanced by the son of an obscure merchant in Shiraz, did not fail to perceive, as soon as his host had begun to unfold his theme, the incalculable benefits latent in his revelation. He eagerly embraced his cause, and disdainfully abandoned whatever might hamper his own efforts for the proper understanding and the effective promotion of its interests. And when, in due course, Mullah Hussein was given the opportunity of appreciating the transcendent sublimity of the writings of Qudus, he, with his usual sagacity and unerring judgment, was likewise able to estimate the true worth and merit of those special gifts with which both the person and the utterance of Qudus were endowed. The vastness of his own acquired knowledge dwindled into insignificance before the all-encompassing, the God-given virtues which the spirit of this youth displayed. That very moment he pledged his undying loyalty to him who so powerfully mirrored forth the radiance of his own beloved master. He felt it to be his first obligation to subordinate himself entirely to Qudus, to follow in his footsteps, to abide by his will, and to ensure by every means in his power his welfare and safety. Until the hour of his martyrdom, Mullah Hussein remained faithful to his pledge. In the extreme deference which he henceforth showed to Qudus, he was solely actuated by a firm and unalterable conviction of the reality of those supernatural gifts which so clearly distinguished him from the rest of his fellow disciples. No other consideration induced him to show such deference and humility in his behavior towards one who seemed to be but his equal. Mullah Hussein's keen insight swiftly apprehended the magnitude of the power that lay latent in him, and the nobility of his character impelled him to demonstrate befittingly his recognition of that truth. Such was the transformation wrought in the attitude of Mullah Hussein towards Qudus, that the believers who gathered the next morning at his house were extremely surprised to find that the guest who the night before had occupied the seat of honor, and upon whom had been lavished such kindness and hospitality, had given his seat to his host, and was now standing in his place at the threshold in an attitude of complete humility. The first words which, in the company of the assembled believers, Qudus addressed to Mullah Hussein were the following: "Now, at this very hour, you should arise, and, armed with a rod of wisdom and of might, silence the host of evil plotters who strive to discredit the fair name of the faith of God. You should face that multitude and confound their forces. You should place your reliance upon the grace of God, and should regard their machinations as a futile attempt to obscure the radiance of the cause. You should interview the Sayyidul Ulama, that notorious and false-hearted tyrant, and should fearlessly disclose to his eyes the distinguishing features of this revelation. From thence you should proceed to Khorasan. In the town of Mashhad you should build a house so designed as both to serve for our private residence and at the same time afford adequate facilities for the reception of our guests. Thither we shall shortly journey, and in that house we shall dwell. To it you shall invite every receptive soul who we hope may be guided to the river of everlasting life. We shall prepare and admonish them to band themselves together and proclaim the cause of God." Mullah Hussein set out the next day at the hour of sunrise to interview the Sayyidul Ulama. Alone and unaided, he sought his presence and conveyed to him, as bidden by Qudus, the message of the new day. With fearlessness and eloquence he pleaded, in the midst of the assembled disciples, the cause of his beloved master, called upon him to demolish those idols which his own idle fancy had carved, and to plant upon their shattered fragments the standards of divine guidance. He appealed to him to disentangle his mind from the fettering creeds of the past, and to hasten free and untrammeled to the shores of eternal salvation. With characteristic vigor he defeated every argument with which that specious sorcerer sought to refute the truth of the divine message, and exposed by means of his unanswerable logic the fallacies of every doctrine that he endeavored to propound. Assailed by the fear lest the congregation of his disciples should unanimously rally round the person of Mullah Hussein, the Sayyidul Ulama had recourse to the meanest of devices, and indulged in the most abusive language in the hope of safeguarding the integrity of his position. He hurled his calumnies into the face of Mullah Hussein, and contemptuously ignoring the proofs and testimonies adduced by his opponent, confidently asserted, without the least justification on his part, the futility of the cause he had been summoned to embrace. No sooner had Mullah Hussein realized his utter incapacity to apprehend the significance of the message he had brought him, than he arose from his seat and said, "My argument has failed to rouse you from your sleep of negligence. My deeds will, in the days to come, prove to you the power of the message you have chosen to despise." He spoke with such vehemence and emotion that Sayyidul Ulama was utterly confounded. Such was the consternation of his soul that he was unable to reply. Mullah Hussein then turned to a member of that audience who seemed to have felt the influence of his words, and charged him to relate to Qudus the circumstances of this interview. "Say to him," he added, "inasmuch as you did not specifically command me to seek your presence, I have determined to set out immediately for Khorasan. I proceed to carry out in their entirety those things which you have instructed me to perform." Alone and with a heart wholly detached from all else but God, Mullah Hussein set out on his journey to Mashhad. His only companion as he trod his way to Khorasan was the thought of accomplishing faithfully the wishes of Qudus, and his one sustenance the consciousness of his unfailing promise. He went directly to the home of Mirza Muhammad Baqir Kaini, and was soon able to buy in the neighborhood of that house, in Bala-Kiaban, a tract of land on which he began to erect the house which he had been commanded to build, and to which he gave the name of Bábí, a name that it bears to the present day. Shortly after it was completed, Qudus arrived at Mashhad, and abode in that house. A steady stream of visitors, whom the energy and zeal of Mullah Hussein had prepared for the acceptance of the faith, poured into the presence of Qudus, acknowledged the claim of the cause, and willingly enlisted under its banner. The all-observing vigilance with which Mullah Hussein labored to diffuse the knowledge of the new revelation and the masterly manner in which Qudus edified its ever-increasing adherents gave rise to a wave of enthusiasm which swept over the entire city of Mashhad, and the effects of which spread rapidly beyond the confines of Khorasan. The house of Bábí was soon converted into a rallying centre for a multitude of devotees who were fired with an inflexible resolve to demonstrate, by every means in their power, the great inherent energies of their faith.